Good day to all. Welcome to Straight Talk with Greg Middleton. My name is Alexandra. With this introduction, here is Greg.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. We ended our last segment and got pretty heavy. Originally, we had kind of had a script of what we wanted to talk about, but you can't really have straight talk if you're talking from a script because people are emotional, our minds move like that. So I'd rather just talk to Mr. Gordon Martin, my friend, unscripted. And that's the whole concept of straight talk. People need to get together and talk about what bothers you, what's in your heart. You know what I mean? I'm willing to share my heart with you, and if you're willing to share, maybe we can learn something about each other. And I think that's the key. We ended up just broaching the subject of race. Now, that's a very, very deep subject, and we're two African Americans talking about race, so we're like bringing sand to the beach, but other people need to hear the same thing. Because a lot of our white friends, and I have a lot of white friends, they're afraid to have these conversations. You know what I mean? So if we're openly willing to have this conversation about race, I mean, you look at what's happening with the judge right now. If you look at that on television, do you think it's kind of obvious that this is racism right in your face? Do you see that, Mr. Gordon Martin?
Yes, I do.
I mean, we see it, but do you think the other communities see it?
That's the real point, Greg.
Okay.
I have talked to other people that are not African American.
Right.
Who say, well, what's wrong?
Right.
What's wrong with that? She's got to answer that question.
Right.
Wow, would you talk to your mama that way?
Right.
No, you wouldn't.
Right.
This is a distinguished person. And I think one of the things that makes it so difficult to talk about race is because oftentimes when we talk about race outside the African American community, with other people of color, including white people, is that they get defensive.
Right.
Because some of the things they say and they do that are racist, they look at it and say, I'm not overtly racist.
Right.
You're probably not.
Yeah.
But when they look at the structure, and the structural racism, the institutional racism, and some overt racist things that they do, it offends them that we notice.
Right.
And he says, well, that's not really racism. I'll give you an example.
Right.
When I wrote this scathing article about the chief, I had a white journalist tell me this: I will not print that article.
And it was true.
Yeah, it's a true article. I said, well, why? He said, well, I'm not going to print that article because, it's not true that there's racism here. There's this. I said, wait a minute, hold it.
Right.
I said this screams of racism.
Right.
And it screams of misogyny. It screams. I said, you have to look at it more closely. He said, well, you can't prove that. You can't prove that. So. It's not okay for me to print that. I said, wait a minute, this is an op-ed piece.
Right.
It's not. I'm not one of your journalists.
Right.
And so that person went on to tell me this. Well, you've had a bunch of black and brown and this and that. As chief, it's about time for a white person. Whoa! What did you say? What did you say?
And how many blacks have we had as chief so far?
Well,
go ahead.
But what did he say to me? He says, about time we had. This is a respected journalist. And I went like, whoa. I went
like they've been shorted, huh?
Yeah, like, what are you talking about? Wow, what has that got to do? That person was the deputy chief. And, what's that got to do with anything?
Right.
It's time for, maybe that comes out of the Donald Trump era. It's time to take America back.
Make America great again.
There's more people of color than there are white people in this country now. We're getting close to it.
Let's do this. Let's go back and frame this. Let's go back to the beginning of America. Does white people deny that slavery happened? That it wasn't that bad? I mean, do you know what there's no denial that it happened, right? I mean, it's in the history book. No, it's not in the history books, is it?
No, not always. It's not always in the history books in that way.
I'm just trying to get the genesis of why we're having a problem accepting the facts that racism exists. Didn't we have to pass civil rights laws in the 60s or something? Why did we have to pass a law if everything's equal justice, freedom, and justice for all? Well, so here's what I'm saying, Mr. Gordon Martin. is that seems like there's a denial of truth here. I mean, from the start.
Well, that's clear, Greg. That's clear. And here's why it's so clear. It's so clear because after the 60s and civil rights,
Right,
movement,
right.
you know, this is my time.
Right.
You know, 60s and all the
Right,
things
right.
that have happened.
That's our era.
We are starting to.
Right.
You got to remember, when we had our last president,
Right.
and we had the QAnon and all these people, all those people said that and some of those groups,
Right.
and there's a lot of large
Right,
group
right.
of them said, you black people were better off under slavery because you got fed, you got a place to sleep,
And a noose around your neck.
yeah, and that this is
Go
okay.
ahead.
And then when you look at us now,
Right.
you see us passing civil rights legislation
Right.
that was passed in the 60s
Right.
that has to be re-upped again because
Right.
they said, oh, racism is gone.
Right,
You had a
right.
black president, racism
Right,
is gone.
right.
Racism rose. Look at this. You can go to the stats and see this.
Right, right.
Racism rose during his 8 years of being the president.
Right, right.
Higher than ever before.
You
Not
mean
just
during
for-
Obama's tenure?
Yes, during Obama's
Wow.
tenure, racism against people of color
Right.
generally rose 100 and some percent.
Now, see, here, that's very interesting to me because a lot of people, my brothers and sisters, say, well, why are they mad at us? We didn't do this to us. It was done to us. And now they're mad at us for what they did to us. And now they're afraid to talk about, they call it what, critical race theory or something like that. They don't want you to teach their children about the facts of how America was formed. So, is that supposed to make them feel bad when we felt dead?
Well, this is what's so interesting. I deal with a lot of young people.
Right.
And all my nieces and nephews, they always try to keep me on track.
Right, right, right.
And the little ones even
Right,
try
right,
to keep me on track
right,
more.
Right, right.
And here's what's interesting. Young people and young kids, they understand this stuff better than you think.
Right.
Especially if you're raised in a family that teaches you these
Right,
things.
right.
But I think what happens is when you start talking about critical race theory, I don't know what that's supposed to mean anyway.
I don't even know the definition of that.
History, the truth is the truth.
Right, right.
And so I don't like that word, but I think
Well, the facts are the facts.
and the facts are the facts.
At least we can say that.
Yeah, the facts are the facts, and the truth is truth.
Right.
But that we don't need to have this discussion without there being some context.
Right, right.
And so with the kids,
I like that.
they have, given the context, they're actually pretty okay with it. And guess what? Our young people,
Right.
Whether they're kids or whatnot, they're beginning to understand the dynamics of race and racism, et cetera. So I have hope.
Right. Here's the thing.
I
In
have
fact,
hope.
I'm glad you said that because, see, sometimes it bothers me because we were raised in the same era. We grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and we saw racism right in our face. Sometimes I think our young kids, my grandkids and all that, said they grow up going to segregated schools. They can go any school they want to until they try to get a job, and somebody said, no, you can't have this job. So they are sadly disappointed thinking, in fact, I'm a fool. I thought America was going in a nice trajectory like Martin Luther King. I had this noble dream that our little black and white kids can get together and have all this stuff, and this is in the 60s. So I believed in his dream, and I really thought we were headed in that direction until this last president came along, and now America really exposed itself.
But could I ask you a question, Greg? I want to ask you. I want to become
Go
the
ahead.
person to ask a
You
question.
be the host.
Yeah, let me be the host for it. So when that president came along,
Right.
and Make America Great,
Right.
which interpreted by many people was Make America White again.
Again.
When you looked at that group,
Right.
you saw that 48% of the population
Right.
got behind that. So if 48% of the population, I don't care who won the election, 48% of the
Right.
population was behind that.
Believe in
and half
that.
of those, I don't want to say all those 48%, because some of them people were black people.
Right, right.
The people,
Oh.
black people and people of color. I'm just telling you.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, if that was a 40%, almost half of the country
Right.
that said, hey, that's
Right.
okay, that it's okay to say, oh, don't tell us about slavery, don't tell us
Right,
about
right.
what happened to them, because
Right.
that's not important, and that hurts our feelings.
Right.
How are we ever going to have that discussion?
Well, that's the whole point that I'm getting to. We can never get over racism if we don't talk about it like this. It's real. It happened. It hurt. You know what I mean? Now, I ain't saying, well, you got to go give me 40 acres and a mule. You know,
I am.
Well, all I said is just take your foot off my neck and I can get whatever I want. You know what I mean? But why are you holding me back? You know what I mean? So it's enough goods in this country, in the world, that everybody could have some. But why intentionally hold people back just for the color of their skin? What sense does that make to you?
Well, here's the sense it makes. Here's the sense it makes. And I want to give this to the community that understands, and I'm not talking about the black community. I'm
Right.
talking about the outside the black community.
Right, right.
There are many people that have the right idea in mind about how we move forward
Right.
and really want to talk about critical race theory. I don't want to like that word, but
No, I don't like that
history,
word.
et cetera, et cetera.
Right, history.
But that fringe group,
Right,
that fringe group that talks so bad
Right.
and so crazy,
right.
it spills over into the entire white community,
Right.
and it taints them.
Right.
So that it is hard to have that conversation because
Right.
every third person is saying something that's so racist and so
Right.
outrageous that you couldn't have a conversation with them.
Right. You just took me somewhere because it's almost like people get caught up in it. I have a lot of white friends, and I don't know. I don't think we're that different. We love one another. We do things together. We enjoy one another. But this whole thing of racism seems to be something that we are taught. You know what I mean? And the thing that bothers me most is that we grew up in an era where we had to face racism. I'm just wondering, with our grandkids and all that, they're kind of, we thought they were okay until Mr. Trump came along. You know what I mean? So now are we putting them in a better place than we were, or are we bringing them back to the past? So what's your views on that? Are we, are we carrying some dead dog across the line or something? What are we doing?
No, Greg, I don't think that's true. You remember, I think it was in the last segment I said a little bit about this, about our young people.
Right, right.
And
Especially our young people.
Yeah,
that's what my concern is.
yeah,
That's
well,
why I'm asking
well,
these questions.
Here's what I say: is our young people are much smarter
Right.
than we give them credit for.
That's the point.
The technology we have now.
Right.
I know I don't want to see you on TikTok, Greg.
Right,
and all that
right.
stuff,
Well,
but
I got a TikTok account just so I can chase my granddaughters.
please stop it.
Okay.
Anyway, but with our young people are smarter than we
Right.
give them credit for.
Right.
Because if we give them a good foundation, especially African American kids,
Right, right.
Who nowadays you give your
Right.
kids a good foundation, I give my kids a good foundation, my
right,
nieces
right.
and nephews. I think that I have hope
Right.
because they are the ones that will change this country and change.
Right.
And is that going to happen during our lifetimes?
Right.
I'm not really sure, Greg.
that's
that
where
it
I am
will.
too.
And so I'm a little nervous
Yeah.
because I would like to see
Right.
it in my lifetime.
Right, right. Martin Luther King's dream.
Yeah, and I would like to see that.
How
but
many years ago was that?
I don't know. It seems like 100 now.
65 or 63 when he gave the speech?
Yeah. And so,
Well, go ahead.
So no, but you get it. You know, you're worried about your kids.
Right.
I'm worried about mine and my nieces and nephews.
Right, right.
And so I have hope because they get on me and say,
Right.
well, Dad, we can do this. They have
Right.
friends of all different
Right,
colors.
right.
And some of them have those conversations
Right.
with their friends.
Right.
And I said, you guys talked about that. What did he say?
Right,
He
right.
said, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Right.
Wait a minute.
Right.
That's a good
That's legitimate.
discussion.
That's legitimate too.
That's a legitimate. He said,
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Right.
He said, well, I've been telling you this. He said, you didn't tell it to me in the right way because I wasn't
Right.
listening because it was like you were attacking me. But when we sit here and talk like we're
Right,
doing now,
right.
and they have these discussions, they go like, oh, that's what you meant.
Right.
Well, it's not any great breakthrough, but
Right,
it is.
right.
Because if those young people are having that discussion,
Right.
we have a couple of generations that may bring us to where we need to be.
And I hate to cut you off because every time you cut me off, then I can't remember what I was getting ready to say to you. So,
Don't say nothing.
But here's the thing that I was saying. I want to be very careful not to paint white people as racist because that's not true. In fact, if it hadn't been for great upstanding citizens that helped along the Underground Railroads and stuff like that, we wouldn't be here where we are. So white people are not racist. Racists are racist. We can't call white people racist because that doesn't help. You know what I mean? And I don't generally think white people are racist. I just think people, it's like a fish don't know you're in water. So if you live this way all your life, then this is just normal to you. You know, so it may have the appearance to us because we are getting on the dark side of it, the downside of it, but they just doing what is natural to them. So do you call it racist even though it's not the intent? I'm not defending racism at all, you know.
I know you're not, but I'm going to show you how this is so easy for a lot of white people to just say, I'm not racist,
Right.
and I'm not this, and I'm not that.
Right.
Is because I was involved in another big group of people,
Right, right.
and we called it City Conversations.
A diverse group?
Yeah, a diverse group of people.
Okay.
City Conversations. You go back and look at the history of
Right.
this is in Pasadena.
Right.
And we dealt with all of these issues of racism.
Right.
With the police department, with all
Right,
these things.
right.
And one of the things that people really didn't get was institutional racism and structural racism.
Right.
See, if a structure is in place and that structure
Right.
allows racism, the institution allows
Right.
racism to foster, you look at it and say, it's not my fault. I
Right.
don't hate black people. I
Right,
don't do that.
right.
Well, if we don't change the structure
Right.
that allows that racism to exist,
Right.
then structural racism is even more powerful
Right.
than overt racism, because when you call me the N-word,
Right.
I know who you are.
Right.
When the structure is set in place so that I can move things around and jump a white person
Right.
over top of a black person
Right.
and push it up and say it's okay,
Right.
that structure is racist, not the people.
You know, and that brings up one of your key things that you talk about: affordable houses, affordable health, and all this stuff. So there is a bottom tier of our society that gets the crumbs. There's no equal justice, equal for all. So when we're dealing with things like racism, it's not like we're going to start a 100-mile race, but we got to start at 150 miles just to catch up to
Right.
do the 100-mile race. You mean? So that's the inequity within the system. So in order to make anything equal, well, how do you make things equal when we're so far behind? How do you start?
That's a very,
How do you
very
start?
difficult question. You remember back, every time somebody asks me that, reminds me of something called the Bakke decision.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember the Bakke decision.
No, I
And
don't,
it had to do with, and it just reminds me because the
Uh-huh.
law always gets in my mind.
Right.
And it was about affirmative action and allowing
Right.
African Americans to get into college.
Right,
Because we were
right.
so far behind. And somebody
Right.
came out and sued and said, you are keeping me as a white man right out of the system, you know, and you go, my goodness, and go, I'm
Right.
I'm better than that
Right.
Negro that just came in here, and why are you doing this reverse, discrimination?
Right,
blah, blah.
right.
So this is an argument that's gone on for years and years and
Right.
years, and it's still here now, where they say we can't have affirmative action, we can't do this, and we can't do that, we can't go out and hire people of color. That's
Right.
against the law.
It's reverse racism.
Yeah,
is what they
it's
call
against
it.
the law. That I hear it
Right.
all the time. And so,
But you have to make equal footing somewhere. Because I think it's mostly locked into the psyche of America. It was started off as a racist country, and now we're trying to get all this racist stuff out of our system so we can get to normal. But we got to undo 400 years of doing. We got to undo. We got to unlearn, and then relearn. So that could take another 400 years.
well, that's the whole point, Greg. The point is just as the backlash against,
Right.
in the Bakke decision,
Right.
The backlash of saying, oh no, we got to do something to make sure that African Americans can have even footing, and maybe we got to put more
Right.
African Americans and people of color, in
executive positions.
et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But if you're not willing to do that,
Right.
and if you're against that, and we're starting to backslide again,
right.
Even in the city of Pasadena, when we
Right.
say go local,
Right.
let's hire,
Right.
let's hire people of color.
Right.
We have people come in and they have construction jobs, all
Right,
kinds
right,
of jobs,
right,
et cetera.
right.
And guess what? They don't hire.
Right.
Actually, the cannabis industry is a good example. All these people
And
came
we-
in. The
we were
cannabis
intended to talk about
the
that.
cannabis industry.
Right.
And we have 4 or 5 brand new cannabis,
Right.
operators.
Right.
All big white companies
Right.
with lots of money. And we reached to them and said, we need some social equity. We need some
Right.
equity because
Right.
we were the ones most affected by the drug
Right.
wars. Now you're selling it, and we should be hired here. We
Right.
should have partnerships with you. And you know what most of them said?
What?
Shut up.
We got about 8 more minutes here, so maybe we can broach that subject. You were talking to me about the cannabis industry, and I said, well, I know my good old church friends and stuff like that. You say cannabis, they thinking drugs, they thinking heroin, they thinking cocaine and all this stuff. So tell me what cannabis is and why we would consider that as a business opportunity?
Well, listen. First of all, the people in Pasadena
Right.
passed the law saying that cannabis would be legal
Right.
in Pasadena.
Right.
So it's going to be here.
Right.
And they're going to open just like a liquor store is legal.
Right, right.
The cannabis is going to be legal.
Right.
And everybody looks
Very
at,
similar, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
very
you can get drunk and act a fool, or you can just get cannabis and mellow out.
Well,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, yeah, you see, now you're generalizing a little
See,
bit because you know what?
I'm a
everybody
musician,
think-
so, hey.
Yeah, you're a musician.
Hey,
That's
hey,
what's the
hey.
matter with you.
Yeah, there you go.
But no, but that's
Yeah.
a good idea.
Right.
What you're saying, because that's the idea people have, because
Right.
cannabis has so many different. Remember,
Right.
medical marijuana came
Right.
before
Right.
The legalization.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so there are so many great medical uses for cannabis.
Right.
And cannabis, I know some people, especially people over 50, 60, 65
Right.
or so, that use cannabis for ailments.
Right, right.
I know some that use it to go to sleep,
Right.
for all kinds of things. So cannabis has a large amount of things that can be done. People associate cannabis with a guy on the corner going like,
Right, right.
it's recreational, it's been legalized.
Right.
But guess what?
But
It is less offensive
Right.
than the liquor stores we have.
Right.
And it's been proved already because the people that are here, we're not having those kind of problems.
well, I think we're going to have a perception problem because, like I said, everybody's going to associate it with it, and almost what we think dictates. You know, so if you think I'm a fool, then you're going to treat me like a fool.
Right.
You mean? So the perception is the whole thing. But when you think about the effects of alcohol, of tobacco, these drugs that are legal, how many lives they have taken. So if you're saying cannabis, people are thinking about harder drugs. So I think we have to distinguish what cannabis is and what it is not. You saying, oh, now you're going to be pushing drugs in our schools and in our neighborhoods and stuff like that. That's the perception.
Yeah.
That's the perception. So if cannabis is legal, who made the determination of what gets legal and not? Because you got all this fentanyl and all these other things that seem to be more dangerous than cannabis.
Well, a good example of this is that we get to decide. Because
Oh.
no, we did. Because in Pasadena,
We voted.
Pasadena voted to bring cannabis, to legalize cannabis
Right.
in Pasadena.
I think a good place to start, though, you were addressing business opportunities, especially for minorities, because like all this illegal drugs that was coming up on ships and stuff like that, black people didn't have no ships. We didn't bring drugs to this country. We were down there on the bottom end. So you're talking about business opportunities that might be available through cannabis industry. So
Well-
talk a little about that
Well,
aspect.
here's
of it.
what's interesting. When they decided to bring cannabis to Pasadena,
Right.
the first thing the government did, the city of Pasadena said, we want to have some really nice cannabis dispensaries, et
Right.
cetera. We want them to look like the iPhone store.
Right, right,
You
right,
know, and
right,
I agree with
right.
that. But the other thing they said was, we don't really care about one of the, I think, crowning things that we wanted to do with cannabis
right.
was to make sure those most affected by the drug wars
Right.
got a piece of the pie. The
Right.
people most affected by the drug wars, African Americans
Of course.
first and
Right.
foremost, and then other people of color.
Well, most people in jail because of drugs.
Yeah, and,
Right.
and so
So the other people don't go to jail; they do the same things.
yeah, and so when they brought them in, they said, well, what are you going to do about social equity? This back in 2016, 17.
Right,
I
right,
said, wait a
right.
minute, how come there's no black people on the wall?
Right.
Where's our licenses?
Right,
Wait a
right.
minute. Well, since you got all these people here and they got a bunch of money,
Right.
let's do some supply line things for
Right.
African Americans. Let's give some money back to the African American community and to the minority community, because the Latinx
Right.
community was also
Right.
affected by this, and say, let's give some economic development money to them. Let's give some money for expungement. Let's give some money for
Right.
a number of things that we can do in our communities to give back, including give people jobs.
Right.
Guess what? If you give me $50,000, that money's gone. If you give me 10 jobs
Right.
at $50,000 apiece,
Right.
that's $500,000.
Right.
And guess what?
Right.
A quality of life and recycling of those dollars
Right.
back in our community. That was not done.
You know, we're finally getting to the point that I wish my mind could think of this. We're getting to now what I think, how can we solve some of our issues? Well, of course, like finances is the main thing that controls this world. So if you ain't got no money, you ain't got nothing in this world. You know what I mean? So, and here we know who's on the bottom. So how do we make this system and this government free and fair to all? I mean, cannabis is a good opportunity, a business opportunity, but here's the thing that I wrestle with. I think the worst thing, I know, I hate to tell this joke, but they said if you want to hide something, put it in a book, because black people ain't gonna read. Have you heard that?
I heard that. I read it.
Oh. But I think we have to start by educating our own people. You know, I'm tired of blaming the white man or the other man, the government, for our faults. I think it's time that black people come together and figure out what we can do to help our own self. Not against anybody else, but just to help ourselves. So I notice other races do that. They band together, they share resources, they help one another. But why don't blacks do the same thing? Why can't we do that?
You know what, Greg? I just read a book, and I'm going to tell you something because this hurts me deeply. And it talks about all of the African American structures we had in place for cities, for economic development, et cetera, and how every time we got to a certain point, that the white man came in and said you were competing with them, you were doing this and doing that, and they destroyed them. And I'm not talking about today, I'm talking about it historically speaking. But that still reeks true today about how we can, gain something for ourselves. Cannabis is another good example. The cannabis people came in and said, well, yeah, we're going to do something for people of color and blah, blah, blah. They did nothing. Cannabis licenses should be coming to African Americans and others soon. But what's happening is they actually come in. This happened in Los Angeles. They come in, they partner with us, they make it fail, and then they buy us out, and then the African American doesn't get any real business in the first place. So the structure, this is part of structural racism again. We got to deal with structural racism before we can deal with, and we got to come together. I get that.
Here's what I really want to do, because we're running out of time very rapidly, and we hadn't even started on the subject.
Well, I can't
so
talk
would
to
you
no more,
agree
Greg.
to come back for another segment on another day, because we hadn't even broached the subject?
Greg, I can't come here every day.
Come on, you're my buddy. It's really a pleasure having you on here.
I
we
come
have
back
to do
whenever
this
you
again.
want. We can continue this conversation. I think it's a good conversation. And we need to hear, people in our community need to hear what we're talking about and give us feedback. If they don't believe that what we're saying is true, call in, write in.
There you go.
Go to Greg's house. Don't come to mine.